Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to do a response video to Shadiversity. He made a video about not getting scammed on swords. I was watching it and thought I have some things to say that I might add, so this is what I'm doing. I'm going to watch Shad's video and respond to it. And so that is hopefully a useful thing. I'm going to probably be wordy, but fundamentally I'm basically reposting Shad's content here. So I'll preface, if Shad has any grievance with this video, I'm happy to take it down because I'm not trying to be a jerk and take his hard work and mooch off of it. I thought, well, as I'm watching it, I have some thoughts to add that might be useful. So that's the intent here. No, that's an open invitation. The other bit is, I would say from the previous times I've interviewed Shad and Tyranth or talked about his channel on my channel here, there's been some not Shad fans that have come out. I watch Shadiversity's channel. I'm glad that he is making content. He creates content about swords, which there is not a lot of content about. And even if you get it wrong, or even if you disagree, or even if you like swords for different reasons, he's talking about something and shedding a light and hopefully bringing business to the companies that make these so that there's more options, and he's hopefully trying to educate customers. Well, I think he's trying to educate customers. Hopefully he strikes a chord with people and they know more or are able to make decisions, even if they do so, while disagreeing with Shad. I think a lot of people watch my videos on mute just to see what products are out there. And that's a whole nother bit of information that's available. I'm rambling here, but suffice to say, I'm not trying to start shit with Shad. So don't take anything I say here with any kind of beef starting thing. Even if we disagree, I do so respectfully. The other bit you should know, if you are new to this channel and you're finding this video because you're a watcher of Shad, why would you listen to me over Shad? I don't necessarily think you should, but I've reviewed swords for a long time on YouTube, and I study Japanese swordsmanship, and so maybe I have some thoughts on the katana side of things a little bit more. Yeah, that's just a different perspective, I think, more than anything else. So with that said, I'm going to go to the video. It, again, will be linked in the description down below. I would very strongly encourage you to go check it out on Shad's channel and post any comments, feedback that you have. I think it's an interesting subject and one near and dear to all of our hearts if you are a sword buyer, is not getting ripped off, because there are possibilities out there. Anyway, on with the video.
Shadiversity.
Greetings, I'm Shad.
And greetings, I am Tyranth.
And so we have a bit of an interesting, and I would even say important video for anyone who wants to buy a katana, because there are some kind of buyer beware points that we want to raise in this video in regards to what you're actually getting for your dollar.
Value proposition. Now, the reason why this is important, and me and Shad were kind of debating this off camera, is manufacturers will get upset at us for things that we say in reviews, and I have a lot of strong opinions. And this is not even the only topic that I can talk about, Shad. There are other. The point is, I am more than.
Nothing's really been said yet, but Tyranth is alluding to something that maybe happens in the background that viewers don't get a chance to see. Manufacturers, when they send you a sword, as a reviewer, you are, I would say the obligation as a reviewer is to give your honest opinion to the people that follow you for that opinion, right? And so you're obligated to provide transparency and honesty. At the same time, when people send you stuff, they're hoping that it's going to be a favorable thing. It's going to drive business. That's why they send stuff out as review samples, is to hopefully generate interest in the product that they're selling. And so if you say things that are bad, it's obviously an uncomfortable situation for them. They don't like that. I can't say personally that I have a whole lot of vendors that have had any grievance with anything I've said. Most of the time they're happy to send things, and they're patient to get the video out whenever it comes out, and happy to hear whatever you have to say about it. But there is an element of fairness. I mean, I think it's certainly fair to say that reviewers can get things wrong, shed a light on something that may come from ignorance on the part of the reviewer. I certainly have done this, and they can absolutely get mad about it. So you will exchange words, but fundamentally, if you think a thing, then you're obligated to share that thing. And there are better and worse ways to do that are, I would say, get your point across in a way that is not inflammatory or doesn't give people like an unsavory opinion or a negative opinion when you didn't really mean it to be. But that's, I don't know. I would say that I've had my fair share of conversations with vendors, though, who have not been happy with things that I've said, and that's par for the course. But happens in the background, just so you know.
I'm happy to tell you guys the truth, which sometimes these companies don't like.
There is different metrics to gauge swords on, though, which I want to also bring up, because it varies, and there are things that add a lot of price to a sword that a lot of people won't even notice or appreciate, but it does add money. It makes it a more expensive sword.
Well, let us know what you guys think at the end once we've gone through everything. So here we have a bunch of different katana handles that have broken off. Oh, not broken off. We've broken the swords and taken them off.
So Tyrone mentioned something, and Shad mentioned something here, that a lot of people can't notice some of the differences between swords. Absolutely true. You are very correct in that. There are a bunch of little nuances that can dramatically add to the cost of a sword, dramatically make it harder to manufacture or make it more laborious and therefore more costly. Sometimes those things don't mean performance, right? Like when you go buy most products, right? The most expensive one might be the best one, right? It might be faster, but there's some generally products that are more expensive are better in some way. They perform or do something fundamentally better. And that isn't necessarily the case with Japanese swords. So it doesn't mean it's more durable or faster or better. But generally speaking, the cost can tie to the materials, the labor, the things that it takes to do it. It can also relate to where it's manufactured and the cost of labor and time in that region. So those can all be a factor. Does everyone see the difference though? No. I would say though that some features are going to be much more relevant to different use cases. So for example, if you're a practitioner, a lot of the little nuances about how a sword draws and sheathes are really, really important. You may never cut anything with the sword, but you are going to take it in and out of the scabbard thousands of times. And so how it does that is better. Some cars you want to go really fast. Some you want to be really reliable. Some you want to corner well. It depends on what you're doing. That's going to have a big impact on where you're going to notice the nuances, where performance is meaningful to you.
Destruction testing.
Yeah, so you would have seen a lot of these in reviews, and the price points for all of these is unbelievably different. However, the differences between them is so minute that you wouldn't understand. And
I would say minute to the untrained eye. That's what I mean. I don't think...
Okay, so I'm glad I missed the pause there. Shad mentioned something that's important to the untrained eye. I don't know if my eye is trained exactly, but I've done it for a minute. I see a pretty large difference in the handles that I see here. So among the four, these two are pretty close. The black and blue are relatively close in price, and the fittings look relatively similar, and the materials look a little different. This may be a nicer grade of silk, or maybe this is cotton or something. This handle, however, on the $1,700 sword looks better tied. The Ito looks like it's tighter. The handle looks better shaped. This material, the white stuff, the Semigawa, is a much larger nodule that's more expensive to work with. The size of the nodules usually is indicative, or as they get larger, the cost of that skin goes up. If it has an emperor node on it as well, there's only one on the ray or the animal that it comes from. And so those can be really expensive components. Now, does it make a big difference performance-wise? No, but it's like a bling, a showy, nice thing. It's historically relevant. Some like large nodules were also prized, and stingray skin was an expensive substance historically, but that is a meaningful difference. I can also see that this set of fittings looks quite a bit crisper than the other three that I can see. And this one, well, it's not super clear. I think this is the Taitsuki SO5. I reviewed the Taitsuki SO5 in an earlier iteration. Shad made a video about it. I was thinking about making a response video to that as well. I had a few things to say because it looked like a meaningfully good improvement. This is made from Jabayamaki in two different colors. Jabayamaki is a style of wraps. You notice that these styles, the first three, the black, blue, and red, look like a similar style. Hanarimaki, I believe it's called. This is made from multiple strands. So there's basically one large strand that is tied and overlapped with the other three styles. This looks to be made from probably four separate laces that are intricately woven together. It's very time consuming and hard to do. And it's frankly not something that you see in the mass production market, but it is much more laborious, much harder to do, much harder to execute well. And from what little I can see here, it looks like it is in fact done quite well, which is meaningful progress, incidentally, for Taitsuki, who I would say I was not a fan of the handle in the example they sent me. This looks like a significant improvement, and one that if you were looking as a showpiece or to show some bling in the dojo, that would be ideal. I don't know that I would really want one for using, but at the same time, it is a real style of maki that was used historically. It is very nice and it looks reasonably well done here.
A lot of people will appreciate those differences, but there are differences.
Are there? Because
Well,
why Shad want to
there's
do
one
this episode
example.
is
There's
because
one
I said-
example.
No, incidentally, this looks like much smaller nodules than on this one. So the Taitsuki SO5, if I recall correctly, is a $3,000 sword. Here you have less ideal skin than on the $1,700 sword. It's fair to say. Also, I can see these fittings a little better. This was one of the criticisms that I had about the Taitsuki, is that they had kind of plain silver fittings. This looks much nicer. It looks like it tells a story, and they also are unique. The other fittings, while there might be differences in casting, kind of are, I would say, like pulled from common parts that you might find on a number of things. You will likely only find this set of fittings on the Taitsuki SO5 katana. It's not used on any other thing, and it's also made of silver, which adds to the value. But that is while still cast and not like hand chiseled, it is certainly a much nicer set of fittings.
Where I don't think there is much of a difference.
I said, Shad, here, what's the difference between this Tsuba and this one? Because the price points between them is over $1,000.
That's the overall sword. It's not the Tsubas that I feel is jacking up the price so much. But it is true, to the untrained eye, these
No,
Tsubas...
my eye is trained in this, especially when it comes to manufacturing and this sort of thing. They are the same thing. They are...
So Tyrant is correct. Here, I'm stopping a lot. I'm 2 minutes in, and this is going to be a long video. Very commonly in Japanese swords available in China, the reproduction market, you will find very wide differences in the types of steels used in the blades, the amount of labor required to bring out the character of maybe the folding or the polish level on there. And all of those can be incredibly expensive or laborious or whatever, and they jack the price up. However, the range of swords is pretty wide when it comes to the cheapest steel and the cheapest sword and the most expensive. The fittings, however, are not as they don't have the same variety in there. They, like, swords can go from very, very low to very, very high end. Fittings can go from very, very low to like middle of the road-ish or low end, middle of the road. I would say kind of similar with the scabbards. I'm not entirely sure. This is speculative on my part, but my understanding of the way these are manufactured is there's like it's more or less mass customization. If you go to a computer manufacturer and you order something, you can maybe select how much of this or that or the other thing you want in it. But there's like common parts that you're drawing from. Nobody's making a graphic card or a CPU just for you. It's common parts that are fit together in a way that's semi-standard. And that's not quite the same, but similar to what's happening in the swords. And unfortunately, when it comes to fittings, there's just not that high quality fittings available for these manufacturers to use. I believe there is a manufacturer of fittings, or maybe several of them, and they have standard parts they sell out, but that means you will find a $1,000 blade attached to, relatively inexpensive, probably like a set of fittings that's under $30 or something like that. And then you'll find a $50 or a $50 blade attached to those $30 sword fittings as well. And so does it make the fittings bad? No, but it would be really nice to see manufacturers come up with much higher end options or to do something a little bit more handmade, a little bit more interesting. As it is, though, Tyrant is correct in the sense that a lot of the sword fittings will vary substantially in terms of the cost of the sword. A lot of that goes into the blade and sometimes the fitment of how those fittings are used, but the fittings themselves can often be pretty much the same thing and not really that valuable.
$5 Tsubas, that's the manufacturing cost around about there, and then like $20 you can buy them online.
Just to touch on manufacturing cost, if you're making 1,000 of a Tsuba, the manufacturing cost is probably much lower. If you're making, dozens of Tsuba or one of a Tsuba, the manufacturing cost is probably quite high. I'm not sure exactly how these are done. There's like plastic casts and metal casts, and one is finer than the other, but tooling can be expensive. So if they're using these fittings and making thousands of them, then the manufacturing cost is probably quite low once they get the tool set up. But if you're making a limited batch of them, the manufacturing cost is much higher.
Basic brass ones, look, they do look nice. These are nice Tsubas, but the actual cost to get them really is super, super cheap. This Tsuba belongs to a $200-300 sword, US.
Yeah.
This Tsuba belongs to a $1,700 sword.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, that isn't actually the thing that's jacking up the price between the swords.
Sure, usually it will be the blade, but the issue I have with this is when you buy a $500, $600, $700 US katana, the fittings are often very lackluster, which doesn't make sense because, for example, we're gonna use as the baseline for today's episode a Romance of Men.
This is from their custom katana builder.
Yeah.
And I got to pick all their fittings, everything, and it came in, I think it was under 300 still.
Yeah, but keep in mind their baseline one, which has identical blade, is like 200.
Yeah.
And this is the handle for it here.
This is the handle for their baseline one.
Which, when you look at it, it's also very similar.
Pretty equivalent. Okay?
This comes with real race skin, a very tight wrap. You get to pick the fittings if you do the custom one, and
That looks like the Romance of Men Tsurudoi Katana. I did a review on it. It is a wonderful sword and an excellent value, and it's hard. Like that is, I've tested, you might say, a lot of swords. That is, I made a review on it. If you want to hear my thoughts, check it out. But I would say it's a very, very good sword and very compelling for its value. And so they're picking an example that I would say is better than average for the price category and class, and that's a fair example to use. I'm not saying there's anything unfair about it. I would say though that it stands apart as a better value than most, and a sword that is. I don't know about the absolute best, but like it's definitely in that category for what you pay and what you get.
the blade on it, first off, you can get an engraving as well. Then the blade is actually really good in terms of its performance. You guys have seen it. We've smashed it against a bunch of different stuff.
It's a standard spring steel.
Yeah.
Okay. So this raises a good question. What are you getting out of, for your dollar, in comparison from this sword to this one, which we got from Sword Is?
Yes.
This is valued, comes at $1,700. Now, I want to put a caveat on this, all right? Because I felt we should compare apples to apples, where this isn't actually apples to apples. I selected the most expensive options you could get on this because I wanted to see if it's worth the dollar, really.
Sure, yep.
I just went to the Sword Is website and I did the opposite. I said, all right, let's try and reconstruct this sword with their affordable or budget options.
Right.
I was able to pick spring steel, which, you know, and if spring steel is usually good, same length, similar colors. I didn't get like a full wrap on the race skin, just a panel race skin, which is what this one most likely has. Came in at $300.
For the same blade?
So just to note here, because I have tested some of these swords as well, the example Shad is holding up one I wish I had made a response video to as well. That is the custom Sword Is from Shadow Dancer. And as I recall, it was one of a sword they really liked, but also didn't say it didn't rate very well in the overall score of things. And they had some cross words for it as well. And all fair criticisms. However, Shad mentioned the spring steel. I have tested to failure the kind of baseline Shadow Dancer 9260 spring steel, or their base spring steel. It does hold up really well, and those swords are very, very well made. And those might be kind of towards the top end. They would compete very well, I think, with the Romance of Men, and you could probably find some nuances that Shadow Dancer does a little bit better in fit and finish than the folks at Romance of Men. Both were quite durable. Having tested products from Romance of Men to failure and products from Shadow Dancer to failure, I would say that they are relatively equivalent in terms of durability. The Shadow Dancer, I think, does a better job with fit and finish. Romance of Men, still though, is not bad, and they have a very solid value, particularly with the Tsurudoi Katana that Shad showed the handle for earlier.
It was not the same steel. I got their standard spring steel in this length, though, with a bohie.
That's fine.
That's a good price.
We have to test the blade, but relatively speaking, I think that is a reasonable price.
It is. What's the difference between that one and this one?
The blade.
Everything, actually. I picked all the premium options.
You said you made the same sword, right?
No, the same size sword. The same, like, to the untrained eye, if they were looking at it, it's like, that looks like an equivalent sword in terms of size, but not the actual selected options, where even the scabbard on this, it takes like 2 weeks to cure. It's a special type of paint that jacks up the price.
So I think what Shad is mentioning is the folks on Sword Is, I don't know if they still do it, but for a minute they offered Urushi lacquer. You're not going to necessarily see, once it's cured, like a whole lot of difference between it, but Urushi is the historic substance used and is like a derivative of poison sumac or something like that. It's very harsh to work with. It's not very fun. You can ask people that have tried to work with it. It's like playing with poison ivy. And anyway, it's a historical way of doing it, and it's more expensive to get than modern paint, and it's not fun, from my understanding, to work with. So that would absolutely be a reason that things would cost more money. I think the option was like another $180 or $200, though you certainly couldn't pay me $200 to work with Urushi. Regardless, though, that would explain some of the costing. If he's choosing all of the options to yes, then that will certainly cost more.
Premium polishing on the blade jacked it up a lot. The steel quality jacked it up a lot. The silk here and here is imported Japanese silk. Now, this is the thing. I think for the casual consumer, all of the things I'm mentioning doesn't mean anything. It's only for...
maybe. The thing is, the casual consumer, it's thinking with your wallet a little bit. When you say the casual person, you might mean to you or somebody that knows as much or less than you. And I don't know. Some people just like to have the nicest thing, and that's totally fine. And I would say, though, that what people notice about swords can sometimes be surprising, and what they find most impactful about the sword, or the thing that resonates with them, or that they're willing to pay for. Even after reviewing swords for a really long time and talking to people about them a lot, sometimes people just look for nuances or value things that I don't expect. So I don't know. I would say that it is a fair assertion, though, to say that if between the two swords that are on the screen right now with Shad, if one person held the Romance of Men and then one person held the sword as example, and they were a person that might want to whack some stuff with the sword, or it's more of a decoration, they're not using it for studying, they don't have any other exposure other than katanas are cool and I want one, which is a perfectly fine person to be. You may notice the difference, absolutely, between these two swords. You may very easily spot the difference in quality between the two, and pretty immediately hold one and say, like, yes, this one is much nicer and more expensive. But when you hear that the difference is, like $1,500 in cost, disparity between the two, pretty quickly you might say, like, yeah, the $300 one would be more than sufficient for my needs, which is also fair.
I guess what the collector that wants like all that this stuff matters to. I don't think this stuff is going to actually matter too much to most people.
Maybe, but let me put it this way: you chose the premium, the high
everything premium
on this, and it's still a $20 Tsuba. It's still a $20
there is
Habaki.
The Tsuba.
So I think the examples of Tsubas used from Shadow Dancer are a little bit crisper and better. I don't know exactly why. It's possible that they're using the same manufacturing methods, but I have seen some examples of Tsuba from Shadow Dancer and Zisei that have more fidelity in the casting quality. They also tend to take on, I would say, less ambitious Tsuba. So I don't know all the examples that Shad is going for here, but some of the examples with gold and silver detailing from a lot of manufacturers really have kind of, I don't know, like muddy is the way I describe them. It looks like, hey, if it was a picture of a dragon or a tiger, it looks, like somebody smudged it, like it had the Adobe blur filter rubbed over it or something like that. The examples from Shadow Dancer tend to be a little crisper. Fundamentally, they're probably made in a very similar way. Does that make them better? Not necessarily, but I would say that the casting quality tends to be a little better on the Shadow Dancer and Zisei versus what I would describe as like the parts bin special stuff from like the other example from Hanban, for example. I like the sword, not trying to dig on it, but the Tsuba that was provided was definitely, in my estimation, an order of magnitude worse than what was used on the custom Shadow Dancer sword that was sent my way. So anyway, I do think that they're a little better. What matters though? That's a fair question as well. If you don't care about that, like if being able to make out like the scales clearly on a dragon doesn't really matter to you, then yeah, don't spend your money on it.
Okay, looks very equivalent. But if you actually have a look at the quality of the casting on the two ends, this has a much finer grain specific casting. Like these actually are higher.
So this looks quite decent over here. The Surudoi Katana, I actually recall the example on the Surudoi Katana that I had also being relatively clear. I was surprised at how nice the casting were. It was better than what I had previously experienced from Romance of Men, and gets a special nod. Again, a very, very good sword. Not sure where this one is from. The casting doesn't look bad. Like I can at least make out that they're flowers, but things start to, the shapes get a little wonky in some places. This one isn't clear enough for me to see. Doesn't necessarily look great, but I bet it is. This one, though, I can actually make out like these individual Nanako spaces. And it looks like this pattern wraps all the way around the side of the Fuchi, which is nice. There are different types of materials, and the gold is very clear and stops. And this black area, it doesn't like overlap. It doesn't look like it was painted on by, with finger paints or something. This looks like out of these fittings, this looks like a much, much nicer set of fittings. I would venture a guess that if you wanted to buy a set of fittings like this, it would cost $500 to $1,000 to get something like this, maybe not even made out of silver, which I believe these are. So this is a very nice set of fittings that would be relatively expensive to purchase if you were able to do so. I don't even know if you can.
What we're talking about, though, is you're going from a $200 sword, something like this, $200-$300 sword, bang for your buck. Yeah. This is worth it.
Yeah.
Genuinely.
This is another component, the habaki. I always thought the Taisuki examples were kind of nubby, kind of short, but this is also, again, made of silver. It's a nicer piece. The Shadow Dancer ones, I don't believe are made of silver. They're made of some sort of like copper, nickel, something. The shaping on the Shadow Dancer habaki, though, tend to be really, really nice. You can't see it from the angles here, but this looks like it is portioned and made really, really well with little nuances, like there's little feet on the back. If you look in this section here, there'll be like a little foot where the little notch on the front of the blade that rests on it sits in the correct place, and there's actually something there to support it. As where this is a cast fitting that you might see on any other sword. It's as kind of prolific as all the other fittings that are out here and made to a template and not particularly unique or special. But these other two are examples of nicer things. There are arguably things that make both of these better, in particular the one from Shadow Dancer, I would argue, at least if the example from Taisuki is made the way.
To a nearly $2,000.
$1,700. It's 2,000 for us in Australia.
If we round up, that's 2,000.
I don't know, 300. Like if it was 1,900, I think we could round up.
Import taxes, shipping.
For Australia, if you convert into Australia, this is almost a $3,000 sword in Australian dollars. Okay.
Is that worth it by any metric? And then when we tested the S5.
To the average consumer.
Tyrant is posing a question here that I think is absolutely fair to ask. And for some people, the answer is going to be no. For me, yes. Is looking at these two swords, I'm speculating here, but I'm also drawing from some firsthand experience. The Romance of Men stuff is absolutely not bad. It's not something that I would shake a stick at, right? It's a perfectly fine sword. However, that $1,700 Shadow Dancer sword is one that I would probably enjoy training with. It looks about my size. It looks like something I would really like to use. It's probably very quiet. It draws and sheathes probably quite well, at least if it's similar to the other examples from Shadow Dancer I've seen. The Ito is probably tighter, or at least feels better in the hand. And all of those things, when you're practicing Iaido, when you're trying to get better, when you're trying to use the tool to achieve whatever goal you're after, not having a tool that gets in your way is a nice thing. And if you can afford to get a very nice tool, then yes, but that would be something that I would absolutely enjoy. I've done EI and Kenjutsu for over a decade now. I really enjoy the experience of doing Iaido when I have a nice tool more. It enhances the enjoyment that I get out of the activity. And so if I'm going to spend my time doing it and I can afford it, then yeah, why not buy something that enhances that experience for me? Is that going to be the same for everyone? No, it doesn't have to be. But to say, by any metric, is it better? Which I believe is Tyrant's question there. Yes, absolutely.
I would say no.
But even as a collector, right? If you're collecting katanas, I would assume that you're collecting real katanas, quote unquote.
What do you mean by real katanas?
You know what we're talking about. Katanas manufactured in Japan, made by smiths, by hand forged, folded, blah, 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 blah. Right? That's what I would assume a real collector would want. These are still within the realm of this. Well,
performance-wise, yes. And this is where we raise a...
So Tyrant is bringing up another valid question. There are people that collect katanas, and when I speak to collectors, there are people that want something that increases in value. That's one element of a collector, as somebody who's using collection as an investment. And if that's what you're looking for, even some place to store your money so it at least holds your value. Reproduction swords are not going to do that, and Tyrant is right. Those collectors might look towards Nihonto more, even though that might not be the best place to invest, so to speak. Otherwise, collectors tend to just like what they like, and there's no rhyme or reason. Maybe you want something that, if you ever decide to practice EI, is going to be a great tool for it, and also looks pretty. Or maybe you just like the way the Romance of Men sparkles, or maybe you see one full of swirly mitsudomes and just have to have it because you have some odd obsession with that Japanese moan. Either way, I don't know. Collectors going to collect what collectors collect. That's not a helpful thing to say, but it's what I got.
I was almost going to try and call this is like the Ferrari of swords, but it's not a fair comparison there, because a Ferrari is a specifically built machine that performs vastly higher than most other cars. And that's why it's so much more expensive.
Supercar, yeah.
Where the sword that I built on the Sword is website, right? That would come in for about $300. We know the different performances of the grades of steel that you can get. Spring steel usually always performs better.
Yes, but...
And for this size sword, it would.
Yes, but heat treating is also like so
yeah,
crucial.
I know. Yeah, and that you have to determine between manufacturer.
Yes.
And we have qualified the Romance of Men spring steel as being pretty damn good, honestly.
I've actually tested Romance of Men and Shadow Dancer. I mentioned this before. I've tested them both to failure. They both seem to do about the same. I know Shad tested this S5 sword. It didn't last as long as they had hoped it would. If it was 9260 spring steel and you were talking about a Shadow Dancer or a Romance of Men made from the same material and they were the same size sword and you were testing them in the same way, I would venture, I guess, you would get relatively similar results.
Bang on.
We haven't confirmed the sword is spring steel, but if it comes in as good, right? You can get a $300 sword that to the untrained eye is pretty equivalent to this, that might actually perform even better.
The problem, keep in mind, we also have more examples. If we're talking specifically about sword, is that what we want to talk about? The Lotus Flower one and the Straight versus Curve video. I checked them. They are $300, those swords. So right in the bang of this with fake gray skin and lower quality casting like that.
This is true, because you can find much inferior...
Just to note, Sword is a reseller. I mean, they are a distributor. They are an online marketplace. So it'd be like, it'd be like saying a Cult of Athena sword. Sword has different brands. So I'm not sure which other ones they're mentioning, but they're probably from other manufacturers. Just a note. Because if you're talking about Shadow Dancer or one manufacturer to another, I think that's a fair comparison. But you're comparing a store to a brand, and those are, I guess, a store can be a brand. You're comparing one manufacturer to a store that sells many manufacturers, and that can get a little confusing.
You know, cheap swords that are being sold for the same price.
Exactly.
Which is why we've been really impressed with the Romance of Men one.
And that's why we'll recommend it when we get the chance, because for bang for your buck, it's actually good. In the S5 Katana review, I thought it was a different price. I didn't know how expensive it was. That changes my entire opinion
It's true,
of it.
because when we're reviewing
Of course
swords, especially on the rating board, we said we're not going to count in price for its overall quality, and we just rated on its quality on its own.
Sure, but I said at the end, I think for that price, as a cutter, it's actually not bad. But if it's not that price, then that's a different story entirely. Because
this is just a nuance. If you haven't watched Shad's reviews, then I would encourage you to do that. At the end of the video, they put in like a rating. And I do find this a little bit confusing, just in the sense that like the Shadow Dancer sword here performed, it got a relatively low rating. And if the price isn't a factor, then the fact that it broke doing stuff, maybe prematurely, is a contribution to that rating. At the same time, there's like a lot of different things to appreciate about a sword. If the rating is only based on how long it survives abusive testing, then any kind of traditionally made sword is not going to stand up as well as any through hardened, less expensive spring steel sword. The type of abusive test that you often throw at things, those absolutely favor those style of swords. And it's not taking into account, well, at least it's not taking into account to a large degree, if breaking is bad, but like drawing and sheathing really smoothly and being a great tool for Iaido doesn't seem to do much other than be like a cherry on top if it's available. I imagine it's built into the rating system in some way, like it factors in, but just doesn't have the same weight, perhaps that it might to a significant number of people who are actually going to buy the sword. I'd like to better understand Shad's rating system, because it doesn't seem to be based on value. That's usually how I think of rating systems. Is It's based on what am I paying for it and what am I getting for that money, and is it doing the thing that it's supposed to be doing really well in relation to the other things that you can buy that also could do that thing. There we go. I think I said that right.
If you can get the $300 string steel one, then I would say go get that 100%, not the $2,000 one. So I don't see the value in it, specifically this one.
Well, that's the point of the video, is that, and I said, for the average consumer, I don't
see the value in it. Knowing what I think I know about the products, I'm going to speculate that there is a difference in the Ito tightness. That would be my guess. I would guess that the fittings are a little better, perhaps not $1,000 better. I don't think they're going to equate for a whole lot of money, but they probably account for at least what I would pay a couple $100s for. The fittings on these, I imagine you could have them for under $50 or around $50 to get a set of fittings like what is on the Romance of Men Katana. I would imagine to find something like what is on the Shadow Dancer sword is probably going to cost you $300 to $500 ish would be my speculation. They are a higher tier of product and they're harder to find nice examples of for cheap. I don't generally see like $25 fittings on their higher end custom swords. Not that all Shadow Dancer swords use that level of fittings, but this particular one does. The Ito is made of genuine ray skin. The Ito is made of genuine silk. The ray skin is of a higher quality. The scabbard tapers and has a historic kind of paint on it, which if it tickles your fancy, then cool beans. The Sagio is a nicer kind of silk. The Saya is made with more care. Everything is fit better. The Habaki is made to fit a little better. It might not necessarily tension much different, but it fits the sword a little bit better. And there's probably some improvements in like the polish and whatnot as well. So there are a lot of meaningful things. And when you hold the sword, I'd imagine it draws and sheathes quite a bit quieter and better. That's speculation. I don't have these two swords, but I have tested other swords, a number of swords from both of those manufacturers. I like both of those manufacturers, but I do see some difference in what is offered for the money.
I don't think that they would want to go for this because they could get a sword that performed potentially even better. The look of the surface, it looks just as nice, even though the silk will be cheaper. It's not a full ray skin wrap. There are some fittings that actually do have higher detail in its casting. This is a premium type of painted scabbard that takes ages to cure. Okay. The wood, everything. Okay, so there is a quality difference. There is an actual objective quality difference here, but most people aren't going to appreciate that. They want a sword that just does the job of a sword.
But even if you have them, and we have all these examples right in front of us, the differences between this $3,000 one versus this $1,700 one versus this $200 one are so minute.
Terrence is bringing up a really solid point here. To the untrained eye, yeah, they look really similar. Japanese handles are assembled in a way that is generally similar. There are two scales of wood over a kind of hidden tang. There's a peg or two that mechanically secure it. It has a panel or a wrap of a ray skin. Then it has some cord and it's capped with a fuchi at the top, a kasha at the bottom, and they kind of are all assembled and generally look like they're the same thing. But that's like saying like all these watches are the same. If you look close and hold them and feel them, like they're going to be quite different. They tell the time fundamentally and have a face on them and two dials, and there's not that much difference. But obviously there could be a very big difference in cost. And to I think somebody who cares about those as a collection, they notice those details quite a bit better. I'd venture a guess that most people would notice it though. I mean, like fundamentally what you're talking about is like a jewelry part on the sword, like the Taitsuki example. Yeah, it has the same parts, but like they're much more elaborate and much nicer than the others, and it's tied in a way that is much more intricate. It's like I don't know, you get out of you comb your hair versus do some sort of elaborate braid in it. Either way, you're just out and about with hair on your head, but one of them takes a lot more time and it's harder to do, and hopefully is appreciated by people looking at you, I guess. I think I lost my train of thought.
But it's indicative of the whole thing. Mm-hmm. For example, this $3,000 sword was made traditionally, and we absolutely obliterated it on PVC piping.
This is true. It is the highest quality handle that we have out of them all.
Sure.
It is.
Sure.
But does that justify the price? No, I don't think
But what does high quality mean to you? Because when I hold this handle, it's not bad, but I think that's more comfortable.
Yeah.
What they're doing here, I think, is worthwhile. This is a perspective on quality, the comfort and ergonomics of the sword, what feels better in your hand. The Taitsuki SO5, the $3,000 sword that they're talking about, is a sword that is, I would argue a lot of people aren't going to buy a folded sword that is Honsenmai constructed with elaborate silver fittings on it and an elaborate kind of kind of itomaki, which is known to, even historically, even when well done, be more delicate than its simpler counterparts. I don't think people are going to buy that and do the same kind of abusive stuff. Debatably, I don't even know if they would do Iaido with it. It certainly wouldn't be my first choice to do Iaido. It's more of a showpiece or something to use ceremonially or to put on display, and you absolutely can use it. But also, traditionally made swords, as have been kind of established or that I mentioned here earlier, they're not going to hold up as well as spring steel blades. So the $180 Romance of Men Tsurudoi katana is going to last longer when being bashed into 2x4s and metal pipes than the $3,000 Taitsuki SO5 katana. Does that make it better? I mean, in one capacity, absolutely it does. If you're just looking for raw durability, for the ability to take abuse and keep going, then yes. But there's a lot more going on in that SO5 katana with the folded steels. If that has some tie to history that maybe is interesting to you, the way it looks is a little bit more elaborate. Historically, swords may have that as well. And if those things resonate with you, then that's why you spend the money in. It is laborious and hard to do. It may not be the best value, but they are giving you something for that money. You are getting something out of it.
So that's what I mean.
The quality is literally the silk that they use in the wrap. There's an ultralaying kind of braided pattern on it, which is actually takes a lot more effort. And the fittings actually have, it's not just cast out of one thing, it's silver and everything. And
the fittings on them are very high quality. They look manufactured for that specific piece, which at that price point, you should expect. So that's the important part.
You should expect, and incidentally, I think there are only a few manufacturers I can think of that have a $3,000 sword. Well, there's more than a few, but there's examples from just about any forge you can find in China. They will have a $3,000 option. It's usually a Tamhagane blade, and it's got the same $50 fittings that Tyrant is mentioning in the video. Then there's Taitsuki. They offer some very, very compelling, nice fittings. Hanwei Dragon King offer, I don't know if they have anything in the $3,000 price point, but they offer at least different and interesting fittings. And then there's Citadel, which makes their own kind of hand-carved, like chiseled out. They tend to be simpler, but they are not casting them. They are individual. They're taking a hammer and a chisel and beating out all the little details into the steel like it would have been done traditionally, which is interesting. It's I don't know, human and handmade and fun in that way. And then there's Evolution blades, which is one that I often use for training. They tend to use cast fittings as well. Not that they always have to, but that tends to be what's on there. They don't tend to be, I would argue, less elaborate than the Taitsuki as an example for $3,000. So in the price category of things, you actually seldom get very bespoke, unique fittings. It happens, but not everyone does it, I guess.
I still find this more comfortable than this.
So, see, the silk feels nicer on this.
Yeah, but the handle shape,
No, this one I actually like almost twice as much. Like this is one of the things that actually I love about this sword. This is the nicest silk I've ever felt on a katana, and it's a premium option to get this special Japanese silk, and I gotta admit, it feels gorgeous.
It feels gorgeous.
Really, like genuine silk can feel dense in the hand. It feels, I don't know, just more secure. And when you're moving around a 4-foot razor blade, like feeling connected to it, feeling like it's stable in your hand is an important thing. And Shadow Dancer tends to tie the handles reasonably tight. And if they use the quality silk, it definitely makes a very good feeling handle in your grip. You feel connected to it. It doesn't feel like you have to tense down on it and white knuckle it and get fatigued early. It's just a very pleasant experience from a practitioner or anyone holding the sword, in my opinion.
But I want grip when I'm actually using my sword.
But I want comfort.
That's too soft.
This is
very soft.
See, I love the softness. And so I guess personal preference then.
Softness can be looseness, and softness can be like, I don't know, just like a supple material that feels good in your hand. I think genuine silk can balance that out. It can feel good on your hands without a glove, and it can also be very, very tight and very solid in your hands at the same time.
But I do think there is a tactile, noticeable difference in the extra money you're paying for it. But does it justify the amount extra?
Exactly.
I don't actually think so.
I don't think so too. And I'm going to say something a little bit controversial here, Shad.
All
and Shad's
right.
going to get mad at me for it. But the only katana we've gotten in recent memory that I would genuinely recommend to people is the Romance Man ones. All these other, because we've been getting a lot of katanas lately, Shad. And
But that's based on price points. We have gotten quality katanas. We have.
Yes.
Look, this is a friggin' gorgeous katana.
It is gorgeous.
And
But for the price, I would never spend that money on that.
yeah.
Would you ever? All right, step it outside to the viewer's
yeah,
perspective.
I
Would you ever
probably- no.
spend your personal money on any of these swords? Which one would you spend your money on?
Well, this is a tough one, actually, because here's the thing. Let's put a caveat in here, right? Could you hold this? So this sword is katana, is actually equivalently priced as this Lockwood longsword.
They're making some interesting points here, but I think they're going to start talking about the longsword comparison, which will make me go on a tangent elsewhere. Tyrant asked a very valid question. What would you spend your own personal money on? Now, I have an example as well that I've reviewed from Sword that was a custom make by Shadow Dancer, and it was a little less expensive than the one that they chose. I would spend my money on that. That would be my choice. Not that I don't like the Romance of Men katana. It's a good choice. I think. That said, it doesn't satisfy my desires as a practitioner for a good experience moving the sword. It's not that it isn't durable enough. It's just that I want something quieter, that draws on sheaths better, and that is a more refined user experience for doing Yido, and that also I can cut stuff with, and that is also durable. And I feel like I really got that with the custom Shadow Dancer thing. I got to pick out the exact fittings. They had swirly Mitsudomes, they had a Tsuba that I don't see anyone else offer. That was really compelling to me, and it was of good quality. There are a lot of nuances that I really appreciate about that sword, and I would absolutely spend my money. In fact, if I, years and years and years ago, when I bought my first really expensive sword, had that sword, I don't think I ever would have made this YouTube channel. This started it because I got like a sword that I really didn't like, and was like, maybe I can add to the conversation. I think if I got the sword as Shadow Dancer sword, I would have been happy and moved on with my life and wouldn't be on YouTube now.
In terms of quality, manufacturing quality, the end thing, they're actually kind of equivalent.
Sure.
How precise the lines are on the blade, all right? There's precision machining done on them both. The scabbards are both very high quality. The fittings are precise and perfect, okay? And so the interesting thing that kind of comes in is that you can actually get a really good katana for a lot cheaper than you can find really good longswords.
Yes.
This is just the reality.
I think if you wanted, you could probably get a really, really nice katana for like $600 US, and it could be like almost exactly how you want it, right?
Yeah.
The longsword equivalent of that, even in like the $500 range, they're good. They're good. Fit and finish is good, but they're not to the same level of like this.
They're not
even
pristine.
close.
Like
Yeah.
a truly pristine level longsword or medieval sword, you're in the range of $1,000 at least, usually. Okay. And that's the interesting thing. I
So I suppose one thing to note is that this longsword is made in the U.S. I want to say that it's probably $2,000-ish. They are. When Shad got this, it might have been similar to this in price. I don't know if it still is or not. Lockwood is a higher end offering in terms of the European swords. I've only had the pleasure of playing with a few. And like I've never had one in hand for a really long time to spend a lot of time with. It's always been in passing other people's stuff when I visited Cult of Athena, etc. But it's made in the U.S. with U.S. labor rates and like a guy trying to make a living making swords, as where Shadow Dancer is made in China, and the cost of living is different and the labor rates are different. Quality wise, yeah, maybe. But as I look at it, you have a respected guy who's making one-of-a-kind swords, or at least swords one at a time, and he's doing all of it, and it's his kind of reputation goes into it. Shadow Dancer is a brand. It's a little different. It's not Stephen Lockwood, the guy who made every part of that sword. It's Shadow Dancer, and you don't necessarily know the smith behind who's making this, that, or the other thing. They do seem a little bit different. Equivalently, a custom Japanese sword made by an American is really tough to get for under, at right now, probably $8,000 to $10,000. Not that you can't, but that it'd be pretty tough to find a a swordsmith of repute in the United States to make you a katana who really knows how to make katana and specializes in it. There aren't a lot of people who do that, and it'd be tough to do for that amount of money. It's tricky. Howard Clark is a really well-known and respected American bladesmith who makes Japanese-style swords, and for a bare blade, unfinished, unpolished, without any handles or fittings or anything on it, I believe he's charging $5,000 for just the bare blade itself unpolished, which means you have to have it finished and polished and have all the pieces made for it. And there's, typically your other $5. If you're handy, maybe you can do some of that yourself, but I'm certainly not. And yeah. So anyway, it's pretty easy to spend way more than that on a sword made by somebody that would be equivalent to Lockwood, as in one person in the US making swords who specializes in making that kind of sword, which is what Stephen Lockwood, I believe, does, is he makes European swords. That's his specialty.
Genuinely love this sword, much more than Tyrant. The thing that blew me away is its precision and its weight profile. And I've just never seen that on a katana. I love the length. And so
if you were to order the exact same sword that Shad did from Sword-Is, I don't know that you would get the exact same sword that Shad did in terms of weight and profile. There can be a little bit of variation. I don't know that the distal taper and the geometry of the sword is going to be the same time after time. Is it going to be good? Yeah, but will it be the same in a way that is, if you held them next to each other, you would say is the same? I don't honestly know. But chances are the Lockwood would be very, very close. I believe he's making this sword to a template, and if you ordered that sword, you would probably get, I'd venture a guess, the variation or the variance between that same Lockwood model is probably smaller than if you ordered that same Shadow Dancer model, if that makes sense. Not that either one of them is going to be grossly different or something, but the subtle differences, especially in longer swords, can really, you can start to notice it and feel in your hand surprisingly quick, and you don't have to be particularly educated in the subject to do that. Now, does it matter? Not necessarily. It doesn't mean you wouldn't like the sword or that it would feel so different that you wouldn't enjoy it, but it's possible that you would feel the difference. So anyway.
I still think it's probably a bit overpriced, but I could get a sword that gives me the jollies just as much and cut down some of those premium options that I don't need. I don't need the premium scabbard. Or I have to admit, I really love the silk. I don't need the premium steel. I'd be happy with spring steel on this.
But keep in mind, we're just comparing to these results here. Think back to when we got the $1,000 katana.
Okay, there are other.
Is that worth it?
Okay, so
what about the I can't remember what company it is. The blue one we got.
Yeah. That one had like authentic either steel or differential hardening on it. Okay,
but the fittings
those two ones that you bring up are a good point, because this sword I feel actually has more redeeming qualities that help its price, not perfectly. Like I said, I think I would actually take down the price by picking different things. Okay, but then there are other expensive katanas that I think are just not worth the money at all.
That's a very good point, because remember, you custom made that one.
Yes.
So imagine now you don't get to custom make it, and you have to spend $1,700 on a katana.
Because bear in mind that
this is tricky. You do though. So if you want to go to the Sword-Is website and look for stock Shadow Dancer models, they're less expensive. If you want to custom make it, there's to choose some of the complex options here. Some of them can be very expensive. If you choose a custom length, if you choose the custom paint job, it adds an enormous amount of money. If you're enormous relative. Anyway, it's more expensive. But if you pick a off-the-shelf model, it's possible you can get something much closer to $300 and equivalent. They become a lot more comparable in terms of cost and features. But this was a custom order. And so I would say that if it was just $1,700 and not built for you, that would take away a little bit of the magic here. The idea specifically is that you got to pick all of those things and it came out in the quality that it did. If it was just an off-the-shelf model and they were, making them as a model to stock, the cost would probably go down because economies of scale, right?
It also jacks up the price because this is a custom selected sword. They have to custom make it, they even have to order away for parts. They have to sit in the scabbard away. And so that jacks it up as well. Custom swords will always be more expensive than ones that are mass made, ordered in bulk. And so I wonder if they mass made ordered this in bulk. This might come into what, 1,400 maybe? You'd be surprised what you can save when you order things in bulk.
Yeah, but I'm dubious on that price to begin with.
Well, they have a profit margin. We don't know how excessive it is. This is a good point. Especially changing it to spring steel, because spring steel is a shockingly affordable and really high quality.
Yep.
That would bring the cost down probably under 1,000 then.
That's still a lot, but I would be much more willing to pay that. Like, for example, when you said that was 700 US, I'm like, I don't know if I buy it just because it snapped. But I am much more in the realm of maybe I would get that. Maybe.
Yeah. It's because they said that one sword was close to that price and then I got it mixed up. But we corrected it for the review, so don't worry about that. So it is a more complex topic, right? But it is interesting that there are some very expensive katanas, not necessarily this one, and we have the examples right here.
So this one was around 1,000.
1,000?
Something I really did like about this one actually was the blade profile. We kind of ruined the tip a bit, but it was so nice there. I know it's not the one you like, it's the opposite. This one here.
2,000.
Sheesh.
And it was 2,000 because it has it's an more exact type of differential hardening, like proper clay tempering, I think, on this, as well as it might even do some different grades of steel in terms of the Honsanmai construction. I needed up.
So Chinese forges will very often charge quite a bit more money for their, like, tamahagane probably isn't the right term, but the bloomery house-made steel. It's very laborious to make the steel. The failure rate on clay tempering and water quenching a sword can be high. And so if you are making a sword that you're pouring hours into and you have to make 5 of them before you have one survive, the price goes up. And in the end result, it may not be honestly much different in terms of shape or appearance, at least to, as has been stated here, the untrained eye. They do look a little different, but is that an appreciable difference to spend $2,000 on? I would, this is more of a struggle to me. The Shadow Dancer examples, I don't necessarily see a huge difference in shape, but they are nipped and tucked in a way that I enjoy using more. They feel better in the hand. They feel like a more comfortable tool to use for Iaido and whatnot. But sometimes the cost just goes up, and like maybe it's a more expensive material, but it's not assembled in a way that is meaningfully better. And so I struggle with the justification on the price on those. And I'm not familiar with this particular brand or sword, but I have seen examples. And so that's what I'm speaking to.
Double check that.
Now, 2,000 for this. These Tsubas and stuff are worse than like these ones.
We're talking about like, this one is from what, a $200 sword?
Yeah, something like that.
And the wrap, nothing special about it.
No, at least it does look like that is real ray skin at the very least. And the habaki there, like it's the same
like
as
everything here.
There's that one.
Everything here is actually super cheap fitting, still good quality, but you find them on $200 swords, right?
Yeah.
These are the fittings that they've put on a $2,000 sword, and then on top of that, its performance was pretty junk.
Yes.
So this is a note that I've given to vendors in China before, and that is, if you are spending more money on the sword, you kind of expect the whole package to be elevated, right? Everything should go up. And if so, it's not to say that there aren't buyers that would appreciate it, but if I go to cars or something again, there are examples of vehicles where it's like, hey, this is the base model, I don't know, like some little Geo Metro that has some giant engine in it or something like that, and people will pay a lot more to have this iteration of this car that looks the same as everything else, but has these things in it that make it faster. And so that's worth it to some people. But for that same amount of money, you could buy just a fast, nice car that wasn't shaped like a toaster. Anyway, it's not quite the same thing, but I would say that the vast majority of customers would respond better to a $2,000 sword if like the whole package was elevated, if the fittings were unique and bespoke and cast in a higher quality, and more people would be happier spending maybe $3,000 on an entire package that's elevated than a $2,000 sword with the same kind of mount as you might find on any $200 sword. That I think resonates with probably more buyers. You would hear less critiques. Now, in fairness, you can take your $2,000 sword if you think it's really nice and have it custom mounted and spend $1,000 to get it elevated. But that admittedly is a big pain in the butt. And honestly, in the US, it's tough to find people that want or are capable of doing the work at the level you might expect. So it can be a very, very expensive thing, and generally speaking, not an option that people pursue. It used to be something that I would recommend when there were more folks involved in that work, and you could send a blade off to have it mounted up, and you could make a compelling sword that way. But that's quite a bit tougher to do at this moment in time, at least in my mind.
Okay.
And that's where the value proposition comes for you guys. It's like, is this worth $2,000? I personally would never pay $2,000 for this sword.
Do you think it is edging on like scam territory?
No, because it is what they say it is.
But there is a buyer beware thing, because there are cheap stuff on this sword.
Yeah.
That doesn't belong on a $2,000 sword.
Yeah. And then the $1,000 one, I mean, that one is probably the closest I've been to, you know what, maybe this isn't too bad. Not because the blade was super high performance. It is a folded steel blade, which is nice. I really like the geometry of it. But all of this, again, is all the same sort of stock standard finish. The only reason why I would ever consider buying this one is because that blade is actually really nice.
It has a nicer silk.
It does.
This has a nicer silk.
But
and
that's not worth it. Again, Tsuba, Habaki.
Like this one, we've literally seen on super cheap swords. Like,
yeah. So this is probably the closest I've gotten to, like, you know what, this isn't too bad. I probably wouldn't buy it for $1,000 US. I'd get a nice longsword or something. And then I brought this one out just for good measure. This is a recent one. I don't know. It was Katana Us.
Sword Us, Sword Katana. US or Us.
This here is $300 and something, maybe $340. Came
very damn sharp.
I mean,
very sharp.
We get that choice with most manufacturers.
But that was standard. This is actually shaving sharp.
But now this Tsuba is even cheaper than all the others.
It is.
This is fake ray skin, and this wrap is like serviceable.
And it's actually more expensive than this one here.
Than the Romance of Men, yeah. Which is why I felt like it's important to talk about these things.
It is. It actually is. And not many people would be aware that, you know, $1,700 sword, $300 sword. There are sometimes fittings that are like completely identical. There were other things that made the price difference. And remember, some of those things are optional.
Yes. And we understand, obviously, getting like a different blade steel, something exotic, different geometry.
Just because I should chime in here from time to time, Shad is mentioning a lot of the companies that he's talking about are working from a similar parts bin. A lot of the manufacturers in Longchuan tend to operate and have similar parts available for the variety of swords that they have. But there are manufacturers that make their own stuff, and a couple have been mentioned here. So Taitsuki on the high end, but there's also Skyjiro. They have, if you can find them, it's sometimes a struggle to get their stuff, but they have a unique line of fittings. Dragon King, Hanwei, did I mention Hanwei? But Hanwei and Dragon King have different fittings that are nicer. Huawei, if you can find them, and Shadow Dancer and Zisei tend to use like recast things that I would see on Japanese Iaito, like from Tezando and whatnot. So they look more similar to the fittings on Japanese Iaito than they do on from the same parts bin. They're very similar, but they are a little bit different. There's not too many fittings though. A lot the Katana US place, Romance of Men, Jayco, Ryan Sword, a number of the vendors that I've reviewed do tend to overwhelmingly use the same kind of general parts, and they all seem to have access to like the same vendor that's supplying these Tsuba, Fujikashira, the parts for the handle and whatnot. And so you see a lot of them kind of commingled, and it makes all of these offerings look very, very similar to one another. There are differences, but that is admittedly something that is challenging. I wish that they did a better job of making bespoke things for their own line of product. I imagine it's an expensive proposition to do, but I believe it would certainly help the product stand apart and be different and unique.
Well, it brings up the price, sure, but does that actually translate to value? Personally, I don't think so. The closest we've ever gotten to that is the S5 one there, but if they offer that in spring steel, then I would just get the spring steel. That's much more reasonable.
Yeah,
I like the blade profile in the blade, not the metal.
Yeah.
So,
like, because this is still probably one of my favorite katanas, not my favorite katana. There are options on it that I think are redundant, and I wouldn't pick them because it doesn't add to the value to me. the type of scabbard, the actual steel type of the sword, but there are other things that I love about it. And so it really depends on what you as a consumer value and want. You don't want to accidentally pay for a more expensive sword that has things added to it that, one, might not be any better than cheaper swords, or two, you don't actually give a crap about.
Yeah.
Don't pay for things that you don't want. You just need to be aware of it.
Very solid advice. Don't pay for things that you don't want, or that don't make a meaningful difference to you. It is interesting to see the difference between Shad and Tyrant. Both seem to appreciate the Shadow Dancer sword or notice things about it that they like, but Shad's saying, at least I think, like, hey, this is something I really do enjoy and is worth something to me. And Tyrant says, I'm paraphrasing here and maybe projecting, but I think Tyrant perceives the difference between some of these things, but doesn't add value to him. And so that's the difference in how practitioners can be too. Some are going to notice the difference. I know very seasoned people that use these swords regularly and don't care about any of that. They use some cheap stuff and it's fine and it's not a big deal. And then I also know people that, after they, use their evolution blades, they'd never go back to using anything else. Having a really high-end sword changed the experience for them, and they never use anything that wasn't one of those or something of equivalent quality, potentially cost. Cost isn't necessarily the thing. I think there has to be a quality element that flows to it, and they've given some pretty solid examples here of ones that don't. But I do think the Shadow Dancer being one is one that is generally elevated in terms of quality in comparison to some of the other vendors out there.
Hence why we're making the video.
And this is something that I don't really think we would make on a longsword, because longswords are usually custom fittings for that custom sword. You don't really have the same sort of territory. With katanas, a lot of these are mix and match.
Well, that's one of the interesting things about katanas, because they are a bit more modular in terms of the standard fittings, and they're more popular, so there's more people making those fittings.
Yeah.
There's a lot of these fittings that people can buy stock standard at much cheaper prices when they're actually really good quality, okay? And so it's hard to all right, this has got great casting, it's got good detail, it's got a nice pattern on it. This is just as high a quality as this crossguard. Some might even say more because it has an interesting pattern on it, but this is actually really strong steel, and there's other elements of it.
There's a labor component to what Shad's talking about. I think I get his message, but the crossguard by Lockwood has to be milled out or filed in a way that allows the shoulders of the blade to sit well and for it to rest in the scabbard. There's a lot of fiddly work for everything to sing nicely together. I'm guessing that it's also heat treated in a way that allows that crossguard, small as it is, to act like a crossguard and defend your hand. So that's a larger bit of importance. A lot of Japanese crossguard Tsubas are not heat treated. A lot of European crossguards are supposed to take a hit, or at least a couple of them, before they break or deform. And so I don't know. The crossguard on that Lockwood might be simpler. It might not have an elaborate pattern on it, but it's been blued. It's got some dimension to it. I imagine it's heat treated. There's a lot going on there, despite its simple appearance, that I would say makes it quite a bit more complicated than the Tsuba. Now, it'd be fair to say if that Tsuba was cast and it was only that one casting, and building the tooling and the molding and all that kind of stuff might put equivalent work. But given that that's not the case, I don't think I would apply that.
About it, and it's very refined.
They're also harder to make.
They are harder to make. Well, actually, good point there as well. Okay. And so because, one, there's not as many mass producers making heaps of crossguards that people can pick between, they need to be kind of custom made, fitted to the sword. It's harder to find as high quality longswords in as cheaper prices as you can find katanas these days.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate. I am on a quest to find the best, cheap longswords, and two have caught my eye that I want to get in to just try out.
Right.
Because I want to find the equivalent of essentially what we found with the Romancer Men Katana. A super affordable, brilliant quality longsword.
Yeah.
So let us know what you guys think in the comments below. Have you actually been really disappointed with a katana you bought? You paid too much for it, didn't have the quality. Also, what do you value? Okay.
And if you guys want, we'll do another episode of this on something similar that has annoyed me for a very long time, that will expose another industry, and I'll do that too. Because I don't. Because I don't care anymore. It's
done.
annoying.
It's ready to burn it all. The other thing I'm genuinely interested is what people value, because we generally preference performance.
Yes, I want my sword to be a sword.
And that should actually be a pretty good standard. Like,
So if you want your sword to be a sword, there's a lot of different ways to look into it. If you want your sword to be very, very durable sword so that you can learn to cut effectively and have it stay straight, and you have a tool that is going to perform well beyond what any historical sword would have, but that's so that you don't have to replace it and can learn your how to do your techniques with a tool that is just more forgiving. I can understand that logic. I like swords like that too. If you want a sword that's a tie to history though, and is as closely made to the way they would have been historically, that's also, I think, a perfectly valid way to want a sword. You want a sword that would have acted like a historic sword would. And if, again, from the practitioner standpoint, if you're learning a historic art, at some point, it's probably going to behoove you to use a sword that would be analogous to an actual historic sword, that would bend, that would fail, that would have issues if your technique is poor. And that might inspire you or show you some areas that your technique is lacking because your tool can't keep up with you. But that tool is representative of the tools of the day. And so maybe you've gotten some bad behaviors, some techniques that have manifested or that you've developed because the tool hasn't failed you like the historic tool would have. That, I think, can also be useful if you're trying to understand a historic art. That's just from the practitioner standpoint. Those are two separate things. But maybe you just like the way the folded metal looks and it's pretty. It's a paint on a canvas to you. That's also perfectly fine. But that means that performance isn't necessarily going to follow suit. Maybe you just like wavy hamons because they're cool looking. All of that, I think, are perfectly fine reasons to appreciate a sword. There's a lot of different reasons to like them, and all of them are fine.
a sword should be able to perform well as a sword and survive a decent amount of abuse. It seems like sometimes we might not give enough credit to the quality of weight distribution, weight profile,
they're all
fittings
so
and things
similar,
like that.
Though that's the difference between, I would say, katanas and longswords. Is a lot of katanas feel very similar. Are they identical? No, there are some small differences. But when you pick up that lockwood versus you pick up like a honshu, they are two entirely different things.
Yes, this is
so there's
very
much more
refined.
to comment on.
But that's
with
kind
a
of-
katana, it's like this one's slightly a little bit heavier towards the tip. But like, that's the most you can
But
go.
for me, I got that feeling difference with this versus a standard
But
katana.
how common is
Tyrant, I don't have a problem babbling about the nuance differences for hours on end. So I think there is a fair amount to talk about. The differences, though, are smaller. That's a fair thing. The European sword has a lot more variety. There's a continent of people making them as opposed to an island nation, and the armor changed and a lot more was going on in that regard in terms of change. So you see a lot more variety in the European sword types, right? And yeah, if you're picking up one type 14 and then you pick up a type 16, they are very different swords. They're different feeling, different looking. They're good at different things, and that is certainly easier to talk about than the subtle differences between the Ito and its feeling on your hand and some other, I don't know, yada, yada, yada.
is this. We get a
It's
lot
not-
of katanas like this.
Yeah.
This one here, that one, and this one here, all almost
all
feel
the same, exactly.
identical.
But that's what I mean. That's why I was so impressed.
So part of the reason for that as well is I believe these scabbards are made, are pre-made. And the habaki as well. So the thickness above the crossguard is also more or less the standard. And there are not, all those habaki fit basically a sword that's 1.25 inches wide and a third of an inch or something like that, or 1/4 inch thick, right? So if the vast majority of katanas, because of their modular construction, are made to fit these like pieces and made to fit in a scabbard that's a particular size, you're going to have, you basically have this industry that's making everything to a template. So they're all about the same size and they're all about the same thickness. And there is some variety. There's a little bit of nuance and difference between them, but they're kind of all a hand that's made to fit the same glove, right? And so there are some limiting factors there. When you get a custom sword like this, there are some differences, but even the folks at Shadow Dancer don't do a lot of variety in terms of thickness and stuff like that. And that's one thing I believe is missing or lacking in the industry of Japanese sword reproductions. There's not a lot of variety. There are a few vendors that let you custom order and make custom dimensions and stuff, and you can experience a lot more variety that way if custom thicknesses and widths are allowed to change. If you can provide like a schematic of the sword and they can make it to that template, you can get a lot more variety in a Japanese sword than you're used to experiencing. But part of the reason you don't is just because the handles are made to fit the same size. There's these modular pieces that are made to fit together, and the result is that they all can kind of blend in terms of feeling a bit.
By this one because it was genuinely different,
Yes.
and I felt better. Still a bit too expensive, but you can bring those costs down on some of the redundant things you don't need.
Sure.
Do you value performance, or are some of these bells and whistles that you think would justify the price for you? Oh, I want that premium silk. I want the premium painting on the scabbard. Let us know. I'm genuinely interested. And why don't you check out our full review on this gorgeous sword? It's an exclusive review, let's say. It's right there. And I do love it. It's just expensive.
Very expensive. Thanks for watching.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Hopefully this video has been helpful. I know I prattled on about a lot of things. I think Shad gave some very good advice and context around some of the similarities that they're seeing in swords. Hopefully my thoughts and musings also were helpful. Man, this went way longer than I thought. If you've reached this point, thank you for watching. I would encourage you to check out Shad's video on the Shadow Dancer sword. I was thinking about making a response to that one though too, because that looked like a really nice sword. It seemed like as a practitioner's tool, it was a lovely sword, and they went right to like hitting it on rocks, assuming that S5 is going to be super durable. And in this case, it didn't last as long as the Cloudhammer S5 sword that they had tested. And I think it would have shown up a little better if they had tested it a little, on a few different targets and played with it a little bit more and brought it up to the really abusive stuff a little bit more gradually. But also I find one of the nuances that I really like about Shadow Dancer swords is on their differentially hardened blades. The polishes can be really, really quite nice without adding a lot of money. They add a little bit, but in comparison, not necessarily a lot. Also, the fit and finish is just really, really nice. And if you are a practitioner and some of those nuances can aid you in your practice, I found that to be meaningful. And so I quite often like training with Shadow Dancer swords. I think that they make nice stuff. That isn't to say that other manufacturers don't also make very nice stuff or wouldn't be a better choice for you. Just that if you have to be a practitioner to appreciate some of the nipped and tucked features, which are laborious and time consuming to do, and therefore increase the cost, then naturally that's not going to necessarily show up well in a video that kind of highlights performance as a measure of how much abuse can it take. But performance can also be how well does it perform doing things that a lot of people probably do more than bash swords on rocks. I think a lot more people practice Iaido or might practice Iaido or try Iaido than will likely hit their sword on rocks. Nevertheless, I still see the point. So a lot of people out there are fascinated by the idea of having like a modern super steel katana, a katana that's indestructible and the ability to fight off zombies with it. And if that's your game, then Shad's tests are perfectly valid, and you should buy the sword that performs the best there because it's probably going to help you in the zombie apocalypse the most. Anyway, those are all my thoughts. I appreciate anyone watching this long. Hopefully it was cool. I appreciate Shad also for making cool content and giving me something to prattle on about. Hopefully it was interesting. Cheers, and thanks for watching.